Hello and welcome to the Jewish Heretics Podcast. This is the official podcast of the United Jewish People's Order. We're a progressive Canadian Jewish organization that's been around since the 1920s. My name's David Wall, and I'll be your host today. For this, our 19th episode, I have the honor of speaking to a cross-section of members of the Camp Naivelt community. One of the things that makes this organization so special, in my estimation anyway, is that we are so multifaceted. We're a bit like three entities in one, actually. There's the United Jewish People's Order that has national reach here in Canada, kind of the umbrella org that oversees the whole thing. But there's also our Sunday school in Toronto, the Morris Winchevsky Shula, which offers progressive secular Jewish education for people all the way from kindergarten up to adulthood, and our much-loved family getaway, Camp Naivelt, which is situated just outside Brampton, Ontario. Naivelt, which is Yiddish for New World, by the way, has been a haven for Jewish and other families for a long, long time. In fact, the camp is celebrating its centennial this summer in August of 2025. That's right. Our beloved Camp Naivelt is turning 100, and to celebrate this incredible feat, we at the Jewish Heretics Podcast have decided to make this episode into both an exploration of camp history and also a preview of this summer's festivities. In this series of interviews, you'll hear multiple voices, people who know the ins and outs of the place and will act as guides for us as we explore all things Naivelt. We'll hear from Maxine Hermelin, Marcia Fine, Charna Gord, and David Chudnovsky, all part of the legacy families who have populated cabins at Camp Naivelt for generations. We'll hear from Esther Ryder and Max Wallace, authors and historians with much to say about the camp's storied past. And we'll hear from Ruth Howard, one of the main drivers of this summer's celebrations. And now, without further ado, Camp Naivelt at 100.
My name is Maxine Hermelin, and I basically grew up in Camp Naivelt. I can proudly boast that 5 generations of my family have been involved in the camp community. It started with my bubby, Eva Swartz, who came to the organization originally through the Yiddish Reading Circle. And my parents, Hi and Lee Schechter, were involved in the organization and all of its facets for many, many years. And so my brother and I, Marty Schechter and myself, were basically raised from the time we were born in the hills of Camp Naivelt. And I can raise my children, and now grandchildren have experienced the wondrous life that Camp Naivelt offers. And we've all, our family through the generations, have embraced the ideals of progressive, secular, humanistic, Jewish cultural and historical life and traditions.
So the celebration's happening this summer. If you were to, what are the elements of Camp Naivelt that you hope to see celebrated the most?
For me, what I'm looking forward to, and I've been involved my whole life, is to bring together alumni and current campers. There's such a rich and distinguished and history that was celebrated across the hills. I have the good fortune to remember, like I was a counselor in Camp Kinderland when it was an overnight camp. I was also a counselor and director when it became a day camp. And so I have very fond memories of the staff that I worked with and the campers, my beloved campers. My having raised my children in this community, they all have experienced being involved in leadership roles in the day camp, in the shula, in the city, and in various aspects of the United Jewish People's Order, our parent organization. So I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of the alumni and sharing the fact that I'm so proud of the fact that today, to this day, the hills are really alive, and you see, and you hear the laughter of children. You share in the creativity of all the programming. So it's a real joy. I Shekolata Naches by seeing it continuing to this day. Highlights that I remember from my days growing up there. The campfires, phenomenal. I often share this. I think I learned a lot of the political social justice foundations of our community through the songs that we sang around the campfires. That was a very often occurrence. Through the cultural experiences, Saturday night concerts at the dance hall, which were rich in content. There were messages. There were messages in the music. There were messages in the plays that were presented. And it was like foundational and informative and educational in so many ways. There were Lokshenbräu, there were story circles gathering around the campfire on Friday night. Every Wednesday night, as I was growing up, there were lectures on current events with incredible speakers, some from within the community, because there were a lot of phenomenal people within the community, and other times guests were invited to present. So there was all kinds of learning and sharing and just it, working together and enjoying each other's company. And the friendships that were built were so strong, and many carry on to today.
Incredible. Do you think that essential to the Camp Naivelt ethos is the combination of almost the equal weight of culture and politics?
Absolutely. I strongly agree with that. And bringing in not only culture and politics, but Yiddishkeit through that culture.
Right.
So many of the programs would have been conducted in Yiddish, but Yiddish was celebrated. And the Toronto Jewish Folk Choir, which was another one of the institutions of the UJPO, had an illustrious career. Many people often talk about the choir having performed on the stage of Massey Hall with artists like Paul Robeson. That's the one that stands out. Every summer, the choir would be part of the Saturday night program series at Naivelt up until when the choir could no longer continue to function.
So that's in the 2000s. That's a long thing. They've had a long run.
A long history. And the choir's repertoire is like no other, in my opinion. It is. We had cantatas commissioned by phenomenal composers. The folk music and the artists that had found their roots at Camp Naivelt. The Travelers, they had connections to the Weavers, to Pete Seeger, so the Travelers were born at Camp Naivelt.
And then Pete Seeger famously visited Camp Naivelt. Phil Oakes famously visited Camp Naivelt. It was quite
absolutely. It
was a hotbed of
and of course Zalman Yanofsky was the son of Avram Yanofsky.
Of Loving Spoonful fame.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you believe in magic?
My name's Esther Ryder. I have a cabin on Hill 2, cabin 29, with a brand new beautiful porch. Our Camp Naivelt has the distinction of having been started by a bunch of radical women from the Yiddische Arbeiterfrauenverein, the Jewish Women's Labor League. I think one has to understand at that time in Toronto, it was not so easy to be a Jew. Well, people did not have money, but they were living in really cramped housing conditions. And some of the public spaces that were available, like going to Toronto Island or going swimming in the swimming pool, were not available to Jews. They just did not want us there.
And this is sorry, just to interrupt. This is 1925 is when it all started, right? That
yeah.
At least, yeah.
Well, yeah, we're talking the early 1920s. That's right. Yeah. Now, so at this point, the men were still involved in fighting inside the workers, what's now the workmen's circle. The women, there was a really clear division between those who celebrated the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, as heralding a new wonderful day with a lot of support, which did happen in those early years for Yiddish culture, and the workmen's circle people who remained social democrat. So these women actually were the first to get themselves together, and they decided that they wanted to have a camp, that their children needed the health of fresh air out of the city. These were political women, many of them, like Becky Lapidus and a number of others, they were busy organizing unions, getting thrown in jail, coming out of jail, but they were determined that no, their children were going to know that they were workers' children. So this small group of people, I think a few dozen women, there was a small group in the Jewish Women's Labor League, decided they're going to make a camp. Other people thought it was crazy, didn't have any money. So they took their pots and pans and they rented a cottage in Long Branch and started the camp.
Sorry, where's Long Branch, just for people who don't know?
It's in the west end of Toronto, near the lake. In any case, the camp was so popular and there were so few places anybody else to go that they had to move to bigger quarters, which they rented for 10 years, a place in Rouge Hills, which is near the zoo. That's somewhere around there, somewhere near the zoo. It was so integrated with the Labor League in the city, which actually was just organized a few years after Camp Naivelt. And then the women said, you know what, this is just too much. I can't handle it. So they had to, it was too popular. So they gave the camp over to the Labor League, but they were very afraid. They didn't do this in a hurry. What if they treat us like a women's auxiliary? Now, these women were not feminists. Feminists for them was bourgeois. But boy, let me tell you, they wanted control and they wanted things to be done their way. But anyway, they became part of the Labor League, and again, the camp thrived. And by the 30s, well, the order thrived as well. The Labor League thrived as well. They were in a position to think about a permanent place. And there was this beautiful, beautiful property on the western part of Brampton, which was an amusement park that was owned by the Canadian Pacific Railway. So they decided they're going to buy the camp. Now, the details are a little confusing. Because of the rampant anti-Semitism, the thinking is that they were afraid to simply approach them as Jews, because they may not want to sell to Jews. It's not clear about that, but they set up a holding corporation. How do they fund the camp? People paid, people bought a share. How do they buy a share? $5 a share, $5 and $5 and $5. And actually, one of our older members who just died a year or two ago, David Abramowitz, remembers how people didn't even have the $5. They were people, garment workers, barely eking a living. They had to take a loan for the $5.
Wow.
And then they would pay it back 25 cents at a time.
Wow. Yeah.
So the stories are absolutely wonderful, and they bought this wonderful camp. And to describe the politics, you have to understand that the culture and the politics and the singing and the dancing and the reading and the learning Yiddish was all one integrated whole. The camp was envisioned as the summer extension of all the stuff that was going on in the city. And I mean, what was going on was incredibly rich. The choirs, the singing, the acting, just the fooling around on
Right.
the sports. It was it was such a rich, rich environment. And you see, for people who lived in such miserable conditions, who they really became was in the camp, where they were a
Oh.
singer or an artist or this or that. And of course, for the children, it was absolute. A lot of the children, really, really loved it.
So when at that point and going all the way into the 1950s, it really was an enormously successful camp, right?
Both the children's camp and the adult camp were enormously successful. For one thing, what people said about Toronto at that time on a Sunday was the most boring place impossible. So if you
Yeah,
wanted action, you hopped on the back of a truck. I forgot the name of the guy. For 25 cents, you got a ride to the camp. And if you were lucky, you hopped on the truck of this guy and you sang your way to Naivelt.
right.
And if you didn't have money, you slept in the dining in. There was a dance hall. You just slept in the dance hall.
So in order to accommodate all of these people and the size of it and the success of it, I mean, Camp Naivelt originally was 100 acres or something, right? It was
It
enormous.
was it was enormous. It was
Yeah.
I don't know how many acres it was, but it was very, very, very
And
large.
at what point did things start to ebb a little bit? So you have, or because it did happen.
Yes, it did happen. And there are a number of reasons for this. For one thing, the Cold War did not help. And because we were pro-communist, pro-communist translated to anybody who was interested in social justice had a really, really hard time.
Yes.
People got afraid. They were afraid to send their kids. Also, you know what? In the 50s, the economy was booming. So a lot of the people could afford fancier camps with horses and, real lakes, not just a river. So there was both the prosperity burgeoning. There was also the Cold War stuff that was going on. And then, of course, in 1956, there was the revelations about people thought that over there they're building socialism in the Soviet Union, and they found out, guess what? They were not. So that caused a major turmoil, I think, in the camp. Some people left. Other people stayed.
Mm.
Other people, I mean, there was one woman, what's her name? Bessie Grossman. I remember I had an interview where she's one of the early camps, and she said, so what they're doing over there is no good. Let them be over there. What we're doing here is good, which is true because the activities in Naivelt and the politics of the left were not dictated by the Soviet
No,
Union. They were people
no.
building unions, trying as Izzy Fine put it, we were trying to make things better for working people. That was
Hmm.
the thing. And of course, when they found out that what they thought that their model was was horrible because their favorite or writers and artists were killed. Yeah, some people said, that's it. I've had it. I'm going to become a Zionist. Huh. And other
Right.
people said, all right, so we won't go there. We'll still be progressive. We'll still keep our socialist ideals, which always had to do with making things not only better for, for Jews suffering anti-Semitism and class exploitation, but for everybody, like the certainly the anti-racist stuff.
What do you love about the camp now? Can you just talk a little bit about what's changed in good ways? What do you love about the
Oh,
camp?
well, okay. I'll say what I'm sorry, which it's just a generational thing. The Yiddishkeit is disappearing.
Mm.
And at one point, the avenue or the route to our politics was through Yiddish and Yiddish culture. So there's
Mm.
still a little bit of it, but that's kind of disappeared. What do
Oh.
I love about the camp? I still love the politics and the dominant stuff is, still quite left wing and quite an alternative to the extremely reactionary mainstream Jewish community. I mean, that definitely, I mean, there are a few little exceptions, but the mainstream it's a place that I'm comfortable with. It's now not just Jewish, like it's very mixed, and I like that as well. I don't think I think I could count on one hand in all the years I've been there, I actually ate supper by myself. It's just such a welcoming thing. You walk down the street, it could take you all afternoon. And of course the cottages, if you need something, you could say, hey, you got got extra milk? And there are cottages like mine, I don't even bother locking it. You want something, you go in and take it. You need a shower. I happen to have a shower. Go take a shower.
So my name's Marcia Fine, and I've been out at Camp Naivelt every summer since I was about 3 months old. So I'm a longtime lover and camper at Naivelt.
And you have family connections that go from before you, yeah?
Well, yeah, I mean, probably my dad was involved from the 30s after he arrived in Canada in 1930. And when he married my mom in 1943, after that, they were coming out as a couple. And then when, my older sisters were born, coming out and staying, I believe, in the tents until we bought the cottage in 1949, I believe.
Wow, so that's deep roots in the place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you still love it, which is a good sign.
I do.
What's important about Naivelt to you? What's kept you coming every summer? Is it just the nice being out in the sun, or what is it about some of the things about Camp Naivelt that you find attractive?
I'm so drawn there. I'm drawn there for the land, the visual, the walking up and down the hills, the river. I guess memories of what it was when I was younger, the old dance hall, the swimming pool. I love the swimming pool. I learned to swim there. The river, I do remember when it was still flowing just below where the pool is, was where I remember going underneath the water and swimming through my mom's legs while she was standing and talking to all the other women who were there, and their kids were swimming around them. So the land and the people.
What about the cultural stuff?
It was just there. It was. I didn't really think about it when I was younger. We used to kind of laugh and sort of imitate. There was always lectures, and there was always like really heavy stuff. We were running around and having fun. There was lectures. People who worked all week and came out on a Friday night went and sat in the dining room at that time, and for very serious political and cultural lectures, and that was always sort of the older people while we ran around and just had fun.
What about music? Has music been important to you at Naivelt?
Yeah, absolutely. Music's always been very, very important, and there were always a lot of people around who played instruments and who sang, and I remember them all very well. And I was very enamored of all the I guess they were probably teenagers when I was young, who played songs, played guitar, folk songs, travelers, anything they might have sung later on, with Phil Oakes and Pete Seeger and the Weavers, and all of that was really memorable. I mean, it's still songs I sing to myself now.
It's interesting. You mentioned that the three musicians you just mentioned, or you mentioned the Weavers, you mentioned Pete Seeger, you mentioned Phil Oakes. They all sing songs that are really instilled with politics. Is that legacy intrinsic to Naivelt? Do you think that Naivelt would just cease to be special if you didn't have the left-wing politics involved?
Yeah, I think that was the basis that everything revolved around, from, things we did in the city when we were kids, and then, and then went out there. There was always politics. was always the Yiddishkeit, learning Yiddish and singing songs in Yiddish and hearing other people speaking it.
Are you looking forward to the celebrations this summer? Will you be around?
Yeah, of course. Yes, I'm very much looking forward. I hear there's going to be a lot of old campers around, and I look forward to seeing them. People I haven't kept in touch with. So that should be good.
My name is Max Wallace. I've had a cabin in Naivelt since I think 2012, and my family has a very strong, long history with UJPO. My grandfather founded UJPO Montreal and was the founding vice president of UJPO Canada. But it was just these stories about this organization. I didn't really have much of a connection to it, except it was in my DNA. Until I came to Toronto, I visited the Ashkenaz. I came every 2 years and just to attend the Ashkenaz Festival at Harbourfront. And one year I came and they had UJPO and Camp Naivelt had a table with all these historic photos. And then I think a couple of years later, I moved to Toronto and immediately became involved. Maxine Hermelin asked me to be a reader at the Third Seder. This was before I was a member, and then I started to get more involved.
And it's interesting, your trajectory, because of course you have this long lineage with the community, but you ended up at Camp Naivelt as recently as the 2000s. So that's interesting. You're both a newbie and an oldie.
I think it was the word bagel brunch that lured me, right? Because that's a big part of my Jewish identity is the food.
Tell people what the bagel brunches are.
Bagel brunches happen every Sunday during the season. There's always a very interesting speaker or author or artist talking about themes around secular Jewish culture or progressive politics, and it's certainly one of the highlights at Camp Naivelt. But at that time, I'd never attended one, but I heard bagel brunch and I was hooked.
Yeah.
Because for me, my Jewish identity, which is very secular, even anti-religious, is tied to the food, the traditions, the social justice aspect, right? So Naivelt seemed to be a place that encompassed all those, and UJPO itself encompassed all those values for me. It was perfect. It was a sanctuary for me, an oasis from the broader Jewish community, which is doesn't really embrace any of those values anymore for the most part.
So speaking to that, Naivelt is being celebrated this summer in different ways, but the biggest event is the second last weekend of this August. And there's going to be a big cultural extravaganza with music and art and perhaps theater and all sorts of stuff. Camp Naivelt, you just alluded to this, Camp Naivelt has always been about a wonderful blending of culture and politics. Can you talk about this history a bit, especially in the early days? Because you are a bit of a historian about this stuff. You're a bit of a font of information when it comes to the history of our different communities.
I just happened to stumble upon this story from the 30s, an event that happened at Camp Naivelt in 1938. It turns out that, of course, the organization and Camp Naivelt itself was still very directly tied to the Canadian Communist Party. And this during the Popular Front period, when communists, socialists, and even smaller liberals got together to oppose fascism. Certainly in the States, it was more of a broad, vast coalition. But in Canada, it was all centered around the Communist Party. And I know my grandmother told me that she and my grandfather only joined the party because the Communist Party was the only organization, certainly in the Jewish community, that was sounding the alarm about fascism. And so I came upon the story that in 1938 at Camp Naivelt, the community and the party organized an anti-fascist carnival to raise money for the returning veterans of the Mackenzie Papineau Brigade. Franco was basically on the brink of bringing fascism to Spain. There had been popularly elected a Popular Front government. It was called sort of Democratic Socialist. And Hitler and Mussolini started to pour resources, military aid, and air power into toppling the left-wing government and installing a fascist government. The Communist Party was very loudly sounding the alarm that this was just a dress rehearsal for Hitler, for his global ambitions. And nobody was listening. The rest of the Jewish community, most Canadians buried their head in the sand, refused to listen. And it was the Communist Party that was sounding the alarm.
Mm.
So suddenly in 1938, the fascists are winning the war. The veterans were returning with terrible injuries. They couldn't afford their hospital care. And Camp Naivelt had this fundraising carnival, an anti-fascist carnival. 3,500 people descended on Camp Naivelt this one weekend in August 1938. And, you know, they had games, they had speakers, they had the music, anti-fascist anthems. They gathered around giant bonfires singing the great anthems of the Spanish Civil War, along with the Internationale. The idea that 3,500 people descended, I don't think there were 3,500 communists in Toronto, right? So a lot of people this was the golden era. For me, the 30s was the most important decade, our involvement in the Popular Front, our continuous sounding the alarm against fascism. If people listened, a lot of misery and evil would have been avoided, right? But unfortunately, people didn't want to. They didn't want to believe that this was possible, and they buried their head in the sand. Partly because it was only the communists that were sounding that alarm, and people didn't want to be involved in that stuff. It was before the Red Scare, but there was certainly the idea that communists were becoming pariahs in the Jewish community.
What an incredible history, Max. Thank you.
My name is Charna Gord. I'm a current Naivelter. I live with David Judnovsky in his family's cabin on Hill 2. I grew up on Hill 1 in my grandparents' cabin. It was my mother's parents. And I remember going there as a very, very, very little person with cousins and aunts and uncles and sleeping on chairs and couches and picnicking out front. I have some beautiful pictures from the 40s and 50s of those days that I've just dug up looking for photos for the 100th anniversary coming up. My grandparents were also involved with the Kinderland Camp Naivelt that was out in Long Branch. And so my family has a long connection with the Shula. We had the Shula in the basement in this house at one time. So my mother's family has been involved since the beginning. And David and I have photos of my maternal grandfather and his paternal grandfather in their suits and ties in Labor League meetings where they would, take a photo of everyone standing up. And there were our two grandfathers in the same meeting. From what decade? I don't know, maybe the 30s, I'm guessing, 40s. So our families, our original families, I think perhaps more in the rank and file than in the leadership and intelligentsia, but we don't really know.
David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So, I'm David Judnovsky, and I'm Charna's partner. I've been going to Naivelt most of my life. We are in my grandparents' cottage. So it's at least 4 generations and potentially 5 generations of us if our son and his children ever come back from Nova Scotia. It was just a formative place for me.
It's just so amazing, and I really am envious that that you have this incredible legacy and connection to the place. I don't really have any of that. My parents were both Americans, came here, so we don't have, my relatives, such as they are all in the United States. I don't have this real sense of this long history that you guys have. It's just absolutely amazing.
Well, David's mom and dad, who were about a decade younger than my parents, and David's parents had quite a collection of friends, some of whom those children are still involved at Naivelt, and some who visit yearly or periodically. But I mean, his mom was a real, they would have all those coffee clutches and the women would meet. And we remember all the Zadis playing clubbyish and the people eating shemeshkas. And when we were kids, you heard a lot of Yiddish. Old people spoke Yiddish or they had accents. And so on Hill 2, Hill 1 was a little bit different where my parents were. And my parents were quieter. They were readers. They weren't so much as David's mom and dad were much more in a social milieu. And those are nice memories.
Yeah, I'll say. I'm going to ask you a question that might be, and either of you can choose to answer this, so that might be complicated. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. So everything changes, including Camp Naivelt. Of course, it's been 100 years. So you just mentioned, for example, all of the Yiddish that you would hear when you were younger. I would imagine there's less Yiddish now. Can you guys talk about things you miss that have changed over the years and things that you like more now? Is that possible?
Yes, it's possible. I have such strong memories as a child growing up in the organization, in the United Jewish People's Order, including Shula, including Naivelt. It was all one organization to us. There was no separation. And I just remember the old people that are probably younger than I am now, but the people that I considered the old people, just that they weren't all nice, or it's not like to romanticize them, but there was a lot of care. There was a lot of love from the old people. And I just remember feeling really special there. We'd have these Mother's Day events from the United Jewish People's Order. We'd have the bazaar at the Order on Cranbrook, just always helping out, volunteering, even at that age, such a young age, volunteering. And there was just a real sense of community, and the Yiddish was a big part of it. I went to Shula 2 or 3 times a week and could, read and speak Yiddish, and it was a beautiful language. My parents are both born here in Toronto. It was still their first language that they spoke. The music, my dad was instrumental in the Toronto Jewish Folk Choir.
Right.
He arranged some of the music. He certainly inventoried it. He sang in it. So the music, the Yiddish was just really a nice part of life. And I do miss that. I miss the old people. Now we're the old people. We don't feel old, but we are the old people. But I think what's nicer now, it's so nice that we've got families with young kids coming back. I really like the kids roaming the hills. And I think now it was at one time almost exclusively Jewish, except for a few families where there was intermarriage, an interreligious marriage. But now it's much more, there's just all kinds of people there. And I think that's a good thing. It's more representative of the world we live in now, especially in Toronto.
Interesting.
That's what I would say. David will say something different now.
Of course, Naivelt in the early years was a much more, in a rural setting. It was a much more quiet and spacious. The park was part of Naivelt as we were growing up, and there wasn't much around. There was a farm behind us. You could walk down a dirt road to a little country store at dusk and get an ice cream. There were, strawberry farms across the road, a nursery further on, but not much else. So it was a real respite from our urbanness, and it was a gradual transition.
Mhm.
But you're still there. So my
We're
question
still
is,
there.
yeah, so you're still there. So obviously there's something still drawing you there. You still get
Yeah.
nourishment and love from the place. So in its current state, because there is a tendency when we're going to celebrate this big birthday to be nostalgic and past oriented, which is of course beautiful. We want to celebrate legacy and history. But for you, David, what's there that keeps bringing you back, even though it's changed, even though now there's a golf course and condos everywhere, and like
Yeah.
what's there? What kernel still draws you back and still makes you love the place?
Well, all that history is still there and very present
Mhm.
for us. So there's a sense of continuity,
Yeah.
even though there's been big change, mainly outside the camp.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's also physically still very much the same. That pool from the
Mhm.
30s or whenever it was built, 40s, it's been renovated, but it's still in the same spot. The river's still there, and the social nature of camp is very different, but it's still very much there. So it's a chance to be in an intimate social setting where people are just a few feet away from you, the other cottagers, and everybody's moving around and doing a lot of things together. And still some of our original friends are there still. So memory is not necessarily nostalgic only. It's sort of a presence.
Right,
Mhm.
I get it. I get it. Yeah.
I also want to mention Camp Kinderland. We were there. We were there as campers. I was there as a CIT. Like those were such happy memories in the colony, which isn't there anymore. And being a teenager there was a very turbulent time when we were teenagers, and some of us had more trouble than others, and that the sense of belonging, the friendships that we had, the friendships that I still have all these years later, all these decades later, they really helped many of us keep our heads on straight during very turbulent times. And the values, particularly around peace, the concept of peace, were very strong. And many of us had experience of first love and young love there, teenage love, and we still see those people. They're still part of our life. So as David was saying, it is looking back, but we're still there's this continuity, or this imbued, is that the word? It's just everywhere. It's just there for us, and it's like my favorite place in the world
Oh,
to
that's
be there.
so wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask you one more question, and that you guys. So the point of this podcast episode mostly is to promote the
100.
the 100th anniversary celebration, August 23rd and August 24th. What are you guys looking forward to? What do you think? What are some of the things you hope get celebrated, and what are you guys looking forward to?
The music.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. Seeing some people we haven't seen in a long time. We're working on the 60s decade, even though we're probably going to sneak the early 70s into the 60s decade. But so that's been really fun, talking to people and getting ideas for putting that together. And I think to celebrate this experiment, this initiative of our grandparents and their contemporaries, that it's still around, and it's had some really rough times. There were some really rough decades that we went through, and here we still are. And I mean, we did have one story, David. We did have a little protest about give us our black. You could tell that one.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a yeah.
Don't say anything
this
bad
is large.
about black. But...
This looms large in our memory. But
yeah.
So when we were teenagers, there were a number of abandoned cabins going up the road to Hill 2.
Late 60s.
Yeah, they were just empty and starting to rot. And so the youth, as we called ourselves, the kids, we took over this cabin. And we used to hang out there. away from all the adults. And so at that time, Mr. Lasowski was the camp manager, and which is a voluntary position, but he ruled it with great authority. And he decided that the cabin was a site of immoral goings on. So, so he kind of padlocked it. They shuttered our cabin.
Oh my goodness!
And so the kids had a protest march to what's now the Hermelin Cottage on Hill 2. It was the biggest cottage.
That was the Lasowski cabin before the Hermelins.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
And, his nickname was Lack Lasowski, and Louis Lack Lasowski. So we had signs and everything, and we were chanting, "Give us our cabin back, Lack." Very exciting.
Yeah,
That's fantastic. And you absorbed what the grown-ups were doing in their protest careers. That's very funny. And now
we were successful.
You got it back.
We got it back.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
My dad was mortified at our disrespect, but in the end, they gave it back.
Well, we've learned the people united will never be defeated.
That's right. And for the 60th decade, we're going to I'm hoping David's going to be able to build a little signpost that we can mark where that youth cabin was.
Oh, that's great.
We have a couple of photos. We'll see if we can find
Fragments
some more.
of the cabin.
Yeah, to show that cabin.
My name is Ruth Howard, and I've been part of the Camp Naivelt and the United Jewish People's Order community for almost 30 years now. We have a cabin on the Third Hill. We're cabin 12, used to be the Dolgoy Cottage, and we've been coming here every summer since our 3 children were really little. And I am an artist. I do art with communities, and I have enjoyed doing a lot of arts and creative and theater projects here at Naivelt. And now I'm really happy to be involved in the creative process leading up to our 100th celebration in August.
You're not only a cottage owner and frequenter of Naivelt, you've been very, very involved in the incredible cultural programming over the years. Can you just give listeners a little taste of what's going to happen at the end of August 2025 as we move to celebrating 100 incredible years of Naivelt? What's going to go on? What's going to go on the grounds?
We're going to, with the community members, we're going to have an installation set into the environment of Naivelt for every decade of our history. And those are being hosted and created with our help, with our artistic team's help, by families or teams of Naivelters who have said, like, hey, I want to do the 60s because I remember the 60s really well, or I want to do the 50s because I wasn't even alive then, but I'm really interested in learning that history. For that weekend, they'll all be up, and people will get a map and a passport to travel through time, and they'll go under the hills of Naivelt and explore the decade stations. There'll be things for them to discover, tasks for them to do, kind of like a time traveling scavenger hunt. They'll have a pass book. They can get stamps when they go through them, and there'll be hospitality at each station. There'll be music, a mixture of music, visual arts, photographs, maybe audiovisual material, maybe fabric hanging on clotheslines that represent things, maybe snacks that suit the period, or little kind of cameo rooms set up with furnishings and props from that decade, and time for conversation and adding their own thoughts and chatting. So that's what's going to be, that's what we call the decade stations. The decade stations, that'll be both afternoons. Then as well, in preparation for this, we've been interviewing people at Naivelt through individual interviews and what we call story circles, groups of people who are sharing their memories and reminiscences and stories. And we're using those for various purposes, to go into a commemorative book, to inform the decade stations, to have text and stories for that, and to create original art and performance and a suite of songs that'll be setting some of that text to music. And so on the Saturday, there's an evening concert, which, David, you can say more, but a kind of Naivelt All-Stars concert with musicians who are, wonderful some quite well-known musicians who've been connected with Naivelt who are coming back to perform, and also will be premiering some of this original music that we will have created with Naivelt musicians and community members. That's on Saturday evening, and then on Sunday to end earlier, but to end the whole weekend, we'll be giving a concert performance of this original material with the community as well, which again doesn't exist yet. It's going to emerge over the next few weeks, so we're not, but it will definitely involve music, singing, instrumental, different styles, possibly some dance and movement, possibly some visual elements. And so that's not all that's going to be happening, but that's some of the creative things that are going to be happening that I am part of instigating and guiding and facilitating, that I'm so excited about.
Yeah, that just sounds thrilling to me. And it really does fit in with your legacy, Ruth, as this kind of maven of multi-arts, multimedia extravaganzas. And it's just, it really is just a wonderful thing. A glorious, guided collective chaos.
Yeah, it's a birthday party, you know? It's
Yeah.
it's a social birthday party. That's what it is, yes. A community birthday party with all the artfulness and, as you say, structure and chaos and pleasure that implies.
Well, we've come to the end of our show. We'd like to thank you for listening, and we'd like to thank everyone who made our podcast possible, including United Jewish People's Order Executive Director Serena Sarin, and our guests, Maxine, Esther, Marcia, Max, Charna, David, and Ruth. This podcast was recorded at Walt Whitman Studios in Toronto. The theme music was composed by Serena Sarin, with help from me. I'm David Wall. Until next time, seid gesund.